So you're going to want to stick around for this video. We are pitching the brand new Samsung Galaxy Note 8 head-to-head with the iPhone 7 Plus. Watching this video from the beginning to the end, you're going to find out everything you could possibly want to know about the differences between the two smartphones, and the results are rather interesting. Interestingly enough, when compared to the Galaxy S8 Plus, the Galaxy Note 8 is not only wider, but also thicker and heavier, which means that despite those really slimmed down bezels, this is a large phone in almost every aspect. Now you might be thinking, if this phone is already larger than the large Galaxy S8 Plus, then I'm going to have no chance being able to hold it in one hand. But actually there have been some subtle design tweaks. Things like the edges and the corners have actually been further smoothed down. It fits into the palm a little bit better, and I'd say that if you could use the S8 Plus comfortably, you can use this one just fine. The Note 8 is encased with two slabs of Gorilla Glass 5, protecting both the front and the back of the phone. It is also far more resistant to scratches than the screen on the iPhone, which, to be honest, undoubtedly after a bit of usage, you're going to be able to tell, whereas this one should hold up a little bit better. The one thing to bear in mind about the finish, especially compared to the iPhone 7 Plus, is that it does attract fingerprints. It is a comfortable and grippy phone, don't get me wrong, it just sometimes feels a little bit annoying knowing that when you put the phone down, it's not going to look as good as when you picked it up. So right on the other end of the spectrum, the iPhone 7 is encased in 7000 series aluminium, a material which is just as beautiful as it is strong. Ever since the iPhone 6 Plus started bending, Apple went completely in the opposite direction, and this is a very solid phone. It also feels great. The material has a soft to the touch matte finish which doesn't attract fingerprints and is quite grippy. At just 7.3mm thick, the iPhone 7 Plus is the slimmer of the two smartphones, quite noticeably so when you're holding it in the hand. Whilst both phones definitely do feel comfortable to hold due to their nicely curved sides, for me personally I just feel like the soft matte finish on the iPhone feels a little bit more refined. Now ironically, even though the Note 8 has about 8 different ways to enter your smartphone, none of them seem to do as good a job as the fingerprint scanner, or Touch ID as they call it, on the iPhone 7 Plus. It is fast, responsive, easy to feel for, and extremely secure. In terms of display, there is much less of a close competition here. The Galaxy Note 8 sports a 6.3-inch 2960 by 1440 Super AMOLED panel, and holding the two phones side by side, the iPhone pretty much gets blitzed 9 times out of 10. Now, you could argue the iPhone does have a slightly more natural colour palette, and it's got less saturated colours on purpose, but for the majority of users, when I've sort of gone out and asked people which one they prefer, immediately say the Galaxy. Now the iPhone 7 Plus has a 5.5-inch 1080p panel, which by this day and age has become the industry standard for a mid-range smartphone, which is to say it's perfectly passable as a resolution, but upon inspecting finer text, you can start to see a bit of pixelation, which when you turn the Galaxy Note 8's resolution up, you really don't have that problem. Now the display technology here is an LED backlit LCD display. This is not only an older technology, but it's also presented in a far more archaic manner. The 7 Plus's display is encased in thick bezels on the top, bottom, and both sides. In fact, the side bezels here are significant enough to make the 7 Plus a wider smartphone. Both of the devices have really bright displays, so you're not going to have a problem viewing them indoors or outdoors, even in broad daylight. The Galaxy Note 8 has a rather impressive dual camera setup. Both of these have a 12-megapixel resolution, and the default camera has an f1.7 aperture. Now this compares to an f1.8 on the iPhone, and what that essentially means is that when we hit lower lighting conditions, the Note 8 holds up a little bit better. Detail is retained better, colours stay sharp, and there's much less noise in the photos. Because both phones actually have a dual 12-megapixel setup, in terms of detail they are more or less on par. The Note 8 captures far more vibrant colours, more contrast in the shots, but that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. The iPhone captures natural photos, and of course the colours and contrast could be adjusted afterwards. In terms of the bokeh mode, or live focus as Samsung calls it, I'd say Samsung just about wins in this case. It just seems to be a little bit better at testing what is in the foreground and what is in the background. Unfortunately, when we hit low lighting condition, the bokeh mode on both of these phones falls straight through the roof. Now under the hood, the Galaxy Note 8 is very powerful. We've got either the Exynos 8895 or the Snapdragon 835 depending on your region, combined with 6GB of RAM, Samsung's most powerful smartphone yet. Using the phone with Android 7.1.1 pre-installed feels very snappy, very responsive. And whilst now testing the phone, the Antutu scores are all over the place, when the software becomes a little bit more mature, we'll be expecting it to home in around 180,000. Flicking over to the iPhone 7 Plus, we have Apple's quad-core A10 Fusion combined with 3GB of RAM, which sounds meager in comparison, but you'd be amazed how close the scores still are. In terms of app loading speeds, both are more or less on the same level in terms of how quickly they can open apps, but unfortunately iOS is a little bit let down by the speed of its transitions. And for me, while using the phone, I couldn't help but feel like sometimes it gets in the way of itself. Apple's focus on these buttery smooth transitions sometimes actually makes the process a little bit slower. So whether you're in the settings, whether you're bringing up your keyboard, there's actually quite a bit of waiting to do with the iPhone 7 Plus, even though it has the potential to run things much faster. Now, gaming on the iPhone 7 Plus, as with the Note 8 before it, is absolutely fantastic. To be honest, it feels like smartphone games haven't got to the point where they can push either of these phones to their true limit. The same is true for the UI, both phones absolutely fly through it, and surprisingly, even with 3GB of RAM, the 7 Plus has no problem whatsoever with multitasking. So whilst the Note 8 does benchmark higher, the difference you feel between the speeds of the two phones will not really be down to the components inside, more the differences in transitions or the way the operating systems function. Unfortunately, something I was really hoping for with the Note 8 was a revamp of the Galaxy S8 speaker, and this didn't occur. There is a single mono speaker firing downwards from the smartphone, and all in all, it doesn't exactly feel like a premium audio experience. Sound is fairly crisp, but it's not particularly loud and lacks almost any sign of bass. Unfortunately for Samsung, in this category, Apple takes it by a very long way. The iPhone 7 Plus, with its speaker located on the bottom right, combined with the earpiece on top, which is amplified and works with that speaker to create this sort of stereoscopic audio effect, is way better. It is louder, bassier, and vocals come out clearer. There is just no competition. So then there's iOS, and to be honest, I could spend an entire video covering the differences between the two, but my main takeaways are this. iOS feels like a little bit more of a tactile experience. You'll notice things like subtle vibrations when your notification bar hits the bottom, or when you max out your volume bar, for example. Things like the Force Touch mean you have a 3D element to your display, and it's very well thought out. The way the front icon that you've actually selected comes into focus and the background is blurred feels natural, and it works well. Having said that, compared to the vast customization you can do on the Galaxy Note 8, there's barely anything to do here apart from being able to rearrange your icons. I also can't help but feel that some tasks, such as changing your wallpaper, just take a little bit too long and are a bit too hidden in menus. And so I think in terms of ease of customization as well as the depth, the Note 8 wins by a mile. Having said that, iOS has its own advantages. Not only is it arguably, in almost all cases, an easier operating system to use, especially for first-time smartphone users, but the controlled nature of the iOS ecosystem means that iPhones tend to stay up to date. So even 2-3 more years down the line, the 7 Plus is still likely to have the latest software. That won't be the case with the Samsung. Another thing worth bearing in mind is that if you have other Apple products, or if a lot of the people you interact with have Macs and iPads, the iPhone fits quite neatly into that ecosystem. The iPhone is a small part designed to work perfectly in this larger ecosystem, and Android doesn't really have that same feel about it. In terms of battery, whilst the iPhone 7 Plus does have a far smaller capacity, it manages it much better. With moderate usage, you'll be able to get yourself about a day and a half of usage, and more than likely, considering the Note 8 actually has almost a surprisingly small 3300 mAh battery, combined with that giant screen, S Pen and powerful components to run, the iPhone 7 Plus is almost definitely going to hold its battery longer. But unfortunately, the iPhone 7 Plus is just so slow at charging compared to the Note 8. The Apple goes from 0 to 100 in just over 3 hours, whereas the Samsung can do something similar in about 80 minutes. The iPhone 7 Plus is available in 32, 128 and 256GB variants, and with these phones, unlike the Note 8, there is no SD card support, which for some people is going to be a huge deal breaker because these extra storage upgrades cost a lot of money. Now, the base model of the Note 8 is actually quite a bit more expensive than the base model of the iPhone 7 Plus, but that shouldn't alarm you too much because this starts at 64GB. It then goes to 128 and then 256, and all of these models support microSD cards. Samsung has done a pretty good job getting the Note 8 up to the IP68 standard, which means it's completely resistant against dust and enough against water so you can feel comfortable taking it to the bathroom or taking it to the beach. In this category, the iPhone 7 Plus really starts to show its age. With only an IP67 rating, it can withstand a splash or perhaps a drop in some water, but Apple really doesn't recommend you go swimming with it. Now, to top the Note 8 off, we have the S Pen, and to be honest, there is no iPhone equivalent to this. Now, there will definitely be some people who are looking at this and thinking, why on earth do I need a stylus for my smartphone? And those are the kind of people who might be better off with the Galaxy S8 Plus. The S Pen has huge amounts of functionality, especially in the Note 8, so if you're not going to use it, it seems a bit of a shame because in the end it's resulted in a thicker phone with a smaller battery. So that is most of the comparison. And what is interesting here is that both phones are really trading blows. This is not as clear-cut as I would have expected given the Note 8 was released a whole year after the iPhone 7 Plus. Nonetheless, there are some very compelling reasons to own the iPhone over the Android. So for example, its integration with other Apple products is something that cannot be replicated. It is easier to use, has a premium soft matte finish, longer battery life, Touch ID, which is a far better way of entering the phone than anything the Note 8 does, and a much better audio system. In terms of the Galaxy Note 8, it's got a better display in almost every single aspect. It's got a very slight edge in speed, and the camera is quite a bit nicer. The S Pen is obviously something which is completely different to anything the iPhone can do, and it's also quite a bit more resistant to water. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would mean so much to me if you could smash that subscribe button. With that being said, I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.